I asked Sarah Zed in the live stream if she would ever make a video about Hetalia, and she said no. So in true Hetalia Fandom fashion, this is me taking matters into my own hands. Did anybody ever see Escalator Austria? That was me. The golden years. Personifying cultures or countries is not a new thing. Humans love to personify things and have been doing this forever. There are plenty of modern versions of this concept that by now are familiar to you if you spent any amount of time on the internet. Scandinavia and the world, Poland Ball, country humans, and of course, Hetalia. I was thinking about making a Hetalia iceberg video based on this great iceberg chart by Reddit user Beats by Cossack. But even as detailed and intricate as this iceberg chart is, it doesn't really capture the chaotic and joyous experience that was the Hetalia fandom. Anytime that Hetalia gets brought up online, it's usually followed by Hetalia is cringe, or something of that sort. And while Hetalia does come with a lot of baggage, I think it's worth exploring how and why it got that way. Organizing this video is tough because so much of the stuff is intertwined, so I'm going to try to keep things as concise and in order as possible, so sorry if this video kind of Pulp Fiction's its way around. I'd like to answer a few questions as well as give some anecdotes about my time in the fandom, which was a long time. Is a long time. Why was Hetalia so popular? Why was the fandom seen as so cringy? How did Hetalia contribute to fan culture? What were some of the big things in the Hetalia fandom? And where is Hetalia now? So let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. Content warning. This video discusses the topics of Nazis, nationalism, colonialism, imperialism, and fictional portrayals of sexual assault, pedophilia, and incest. I will try to add timestamps on things so you can skip them, but they are all important topics relating to Hetalia's cultural presence and can't be ignored when discussing Hetalia. Hetalia, a brief history. Hetalia is a webcomic, later adapted to a manga and an anime, in which every character is a personified country, culture, or region. Their personalities and mannerisms are based on Japanese stereotypes of that thing. It was written by a man named Hidekazu Himaruya, who we will talk about in just a second. The title, Hetalia, is a portmanteau of hetare and Italia. Hetare is a Japanese slang term for someone who is useless or inept or dumb, etc., and Italia means Italy. The anime began in 2010 and sustained massive popularity even till, 2017. It's actually still ongoing, with Season 7 being released in 2020. The anime always sits under the umbrella term Hetalia, but every few seasons or so it changes names, and there was a massive art style shift between Season 4 and Season 5. The first two seasons are called Hetalia Axis Powers, or Axis Powers Hetalia, or APH for short. The second two seasons are called Hetalia World Series. The fifth season, which is when the massive art style change happened, is called Hetalia The Beautiful World. Season 6 is called Hetalia The World Twinkle, and Season 7, which is the current season, is called Hetalia World Stars. Nailed it. It's a lot to keep up with. These first 6 seasons have an English dub, which honestly is so different from the sub that it might as well be considered a different show. But we will get to that. Himaruya who? So again, Hetalia was written by a man named Himaruya. The fandom calls him Hima-san. What's incredible is that despite writing one of the most popular mangas of the 2000s, we don't really know that much about him outside of what's on his Wikipedia page. He was born in 1985, he attended the Parsons School of Design in New York, and that's it. It's important to know that when he started writing Hetalia, he was only 21 years old. It's something to keep in mind as we deep dive into the complexities and controversies surrounding Hetalia. He's just one young guy from Japan, younger than I am now, who is not a historian and can't be expected to be the end-all be-all of historical knowledge. Google Images search results only comes up with one result of a real person, and upon reverse image searching this picture, it's actually a photo of Satoru Kosaki, a composer. Looking at further photos of Satoru Kosaki, yeah, that's him. Multiple websites have this image up as Himaruya's picture. For years, the fandom has been trying to find pictures of his actual face because We have no idea what he looks like outside of his self-portraits. It's become a running joke in the fandom. We know nothing about Himaruya. To punctuate this fact, on Wikipedia, the link to his official website is a deactivated Yahoo Japan blog. Himaruya had a website that hosted his webcomics called HetaOni that launched in 2003 and closed with the closure of GeoCities, RIP a legend. You can only kind of see it on the Wayback Machine. In 2008, Himaruya began a new blog called Bamboo Thicket, where he would continue to post Hetalia art and comics, as well as comics for his other projects. It's important to know that a lot of stuff got lost when he moved blogs, so people who have been in the fandom even longer than I have, which is hard to imagine, might have screenshots of drawings that no longer exist. Now, this blog was almost entirely in Japanese, but he did accept letters from English-speaking fans. How did these fans get in touch with him if they didn't speak English? Wait, how did these fans get in touch with him if they didn't speak Japanese? Well, that's thanks to Bamboo Thicket. The other one. The LiveJournal one. For those of you who are too young to remember 9/11, LiveJournal is a blog hosting website that launched in 1999. It's actually still in use, and it's free, so go on a little anthropology expedition and check it out. This other Bamboo Thicket was a LiveJournal blog that was specifically dedicated to translating Himaruya's blog into English. Now, these translations were fan contributions, so sometimes there were errors in the translations. This blog began somewhere in 2009 and stopped updating due to inactivity sometime in 2015. However, the blog moved to hetaarchive.net, where it still translates Himaruya's blog and his tweets as he updates. Sort of. As of recording this, the most recent update is from May 29th, 2021. Anyway, LiveJournal is where this fandom was born. Most of the incidents that I'm going to talk about in this video were well documented on LiveJournal. Personally, I was never active on LiveJournal. I joined the fandom sometime in 2011 and was mostly active on YouTube, DeviantArt, fanfiction.net. I know. Okay, so before we get into some heavy stuff, there are a few blanket statements that I'd like to make about Hetalia, just so all of us are on the same page. Number 1. Hetalia was made almost entirely by one person. As such, it comes with that person's worldview, experiences, opinions, and even biases. Anything that comes out of the original webcomic has to be taken with that grain of salt. Number 2. If you are unfamiliar with Hetalia, welcome. Just know that it has no plot. It really doesn't. It's all vignettes. There is no through line to Hetalia. Things just happen and are never brought up again unless they are explicitly historical. So when inappropriate or controversial things happen in the story, they are very quickly forgotten and disregarded. Is this a problem? Depends on who you ask. While technically there is a canon, is anything canon? The word canon has almost no meaning in Hetalia. Number 3. The webcomic/manga is almost entirely separate from the anime. Yes, they contain much of the same content and the same scenes, but a lot of context gets lost between the two because of translations and what have you. The webcomic strips are often far more confusing and disjointed than the anime, at least when translated into English, and that's really saying something.
In America, why not go back to making us hot green chick statues like you used to?
A lot of, absolute nonsense happens in the manga because Himaruya dedicates a lot of time to just doodling these characters rather than develop them in a meaningful way. Characters goofing around without purpose or making sexually explicit statements to each other is far more commonplace in the webcomic, and in the anime, it's more innuendos. Number 5. The English dub is a completely separate entity from the original Japanese version of the anime. It is technically not canon, if you consider anything to be canon. Localization and translation, as well as the Funimation writers putting their own spin on characters, has turned it into a completely separate thing. We have to understand that the English dub is very US-centric, and it was written by Americans for Americans. As a result, it's almost completely detached from Himaruya's vision of Hetalia. And finally, number 5, nobody hates Hetalia more than the Hetalia fans. Anyway, with all that out of the way, let's go. Why was Hetalia so popular? So something that separates Hetalia from most animes is that the episodes are only 5 minutes long. That's right, 5 minutes long. Most of the show talks about historical events or cultural differences in a humorous way, so a lot of information has to get crammed into that 5 minutes. And even then, it's only like 4.5 minutes because the outro song is like 30 seconds long. As a result of cramming so much in, this show is very high octane and very fast paced.
I give you the superhero Global Man!
I agree with America.
Man up or I'll beat you with my Peace Prize!
There's no way some hero will help global warming or humanity's enslavement.
If Britain and America don't agree, how can I be superior by dissing them both?
Tag in court!
This kind of show attracts a lot of tweens and teens, myself included. I was 14 when I started watching Hetalia in 2011. Now, this was a great time for me to jump in because this was like right before the show's peak popularity. Now, tweens and teens are definitely known for their hyperfixations, so there was a huge volume of fan art, fan fiction, cosplays, etc. I myself got into drawing and cosplay because I wanted to draw and cosplay Hetalia characters, including bosses, which is what they call political leaders, creatures with speaking roles, and the female versions of the countries. There are 150 plus characters in Hetalia. Now, this is one of the reasons that Homestuck was so popular. With such a wide variety of characters to choose from, you're almost guaranteed to find at least one that you will like. One of my old internet friends stopped watching Hetalia after season 2, but she loved the character of Southern Italy so much that she continued to draw the character and read fanfictions about him well past when she stopped watching. Hetalia was also very accessible to cosplayers. Most of the time, characters are pictured in their military uniforms, which are pretty easy to recreate with just a trip to Goodwill. Oftentimes, the cosplays that you could purchase online were indistinguishable from things that you could throw together. You don't need to spend a ton of money to effectively cosplay Hetalia. I even did a panel about this exact thing in 2013. And when the characters aren't in their military uniforms, they're just wearing standard human civilian clothing, which again is very easy to recreate. I cosplayed a number of Hetalia characters over the years, and most of the time the thing that I spent the most money on was the wig. Now, did I look super professional? No. But to other Hetalia fans, it was very clear who I was supposed to be. And holy cow, were there a lot of Hetalia cosplayers. Another Homestuck comparison, cons in the mid-2010s were overrun with Hetalia cosplayers. This made for a lot of fun opportunities for, in-character interactions and photo shoots. And Hetalia was also just a rainbow of colors. It was very eye-catching. And finally, I'll say it, I don't care. The Hetalia dub was hysterical.
Hey man, what do you think it would take for someone to kill your morale?
If the enemy came in and effed up Lady Liberty, that would suck.
That's it! Mount Fuji! Japan's symbol of national pride. We could paint the whole thing red, and every time they look at it, they know these colors don't run! It seemed a lot easier when it was just a picture we were coloring.
Yeah, I like using the crayons.
I go back and watch it after 10 years, and it's still really funny.
Britain, you okay?
Aw, dude! Britain is totally dead! Let's go get a drink to celebrate!
And like I said before, the dub was very, very different from the sub. There are jokes that are dub exclusive, of course, my favorite being the War of Devolution having nothing to do with 80s new wave music.
The War of Devolution. It involved the Spanish Netherlands, not new wave music.
Aye, that went pretty poorly. Netherlands is a lot tougher than he looks. He whipped it good.
There, as always, were a few avid sub-only people, but I can't tell you how many panels I went to, like Voices of Hetalia panels, where hundreds of people came to see and meet the English dub voice actors for these characters. The localization was just really good. Okay, I wore the coat for like a chunk of time, and now my legs are cold and my shoulders are hot, so okay, I took the coat off. Hopefully you figured out that I was supposed to be Austrian at that point. It's called casual cosplay. Disney bounding is just casual cosplay, and the Disney adults are too ashamed to admit it. That's all I'll say. Dropping hot takes. Why was Hetalia seen as so cringe? Before I go on, I have to make explicitly clear that Hetalia is not without fault. It makes some people very uncomfortable, and that needs to be addressed. Himaruya made some mistakes and choices that haunt the series even to this day. And the English dub is also not without fault either. Number 1, general problems. As I previously stated, many Hetalia fans were very, very young, and anything that has a lot of young people involved in it is going to be very loud and occasionally immature and obnoxious. As someone who now works in a middle school teaching children, I know this firsthand. Now, this can be said about a lot of fandoms, Homestuck namely. Undertale was bad for a while, Steven Universe. I mean, I can sit here all day and name fandoms that had this similar young people problem. But there were a lot of unique things about Hetalia that gave it its own brand of cringe. The volume of cosplayers was one thing. Large groups of young people being loud and crowding convention hallways can be really annoying to someone who doesn't have a horse in the fandom race. And shipping wars, both online and on the con floor, were very, very common. With so many characters, there are a lot of potential ships. Some of the more common ones had uncomfortable implications that we will talk about later. But even things like news articles about international relations were not safe from some of the more zealous fans talking about their ships. We'll talk more in depth about this later too. And something that was not unique to the Hetalia fandom, but is definitely worth mentioning, is the fetishizing of gay men. Most of the characters in Hetalia were men, so gay ships naturally ended up being the most common. And when most of your fan base is young women, you end up with a lot of inadvertently homophobic behavior. This article from the Mary Sue is a great place to start if you'd like to know more about this concept. A large problem was, at the height of fandom, the presence of Hetalia in international things that were not Hetalia related. Let's take Tumblr, for instance. If you posted fan art of, say, Germany, and you tagged it with the tag Germany, it would come up in results for people who were looking for things about the actual country of Germany. This would naturally upset, if not just confuse, people who were just looking for pictures of Neuschwanstein or Berlin. Hetalia-related comments came up anytime the Olympics came around. London 2012 was a really big one. And or just anytime that there was a massive international incident. Sometimes they would be silly, and sometimes they would be inappropriate. Particularly when natural disasters would occur, there would be young Hetalia fans making inappropriate jokes or at least ill-placed sentiments about the situation. Number 2, Nazi imagery. Young people are not always aware of the gravity of certain topics. While Hetalia does not ever contain the word Nazi, at least through all the digging that I've been able to do, young people do make careless jokes about the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. I mean, this isn't just fandom stuff. I mean, how many times have you heard like a 12-year-old make a Hitler joke that he has no idea that it's way more serious than he knows that it is? And in the fandom circles, it makes the fandom look bad. Cosplayers sometimes did inappropriate things, like carrying Nazi flags, or this. So while we're here, let's talk about the Anime Boston incident in 2010. So in 2010, just as Hetalia was up and coming in the anime world, a group of Hetalia cosplayers got together for a photo shoot. Several Germany and Prussia cosplayers thought that it would be funny for them to do the Nazi salute in this picture. This great post from r/hobbydrama on Reddit has the photo as it was taken, but the people who participated, their faces have been covered up. And as if this wasn't already bad enough, this was a block away from a Holocaust memorial, and it was Passover. And I'm not going to go into this whole long big thing. This video is already long enough. Apologies were issued via LiveJournal communities, but it's never going to undo the fact that it happened. And far less important, an apology isn't going to fix the fact that it tarnished the Hetalia fandom forever. For years, even if you brought up Hetalia to people who weren't in the fandom, they knew that this happened, and that's what they associated with Hetalia. And I will say from my personal experience that the fandom retaliated very hard against this kind of behavior. Nazis or folks dressed as Nazis were certainly not welcome in the fandom spaces that I was in or that I saw. This set of cosplay photos on DeviantArt is full of comments from people saying that this is not okay, this is inappropriate and unacceptable. I was at a convention in 2017 dressed as my boy, Austria, probably wearing exactly what I'm wearing right now. I went to a photo shoot, and one of the Germany cosplayers pulled out what looked like homemade, I'm pretty sure it was homemade, a swastika armband out of their jacket. And they were clearly expecting us to laugh, like they wanted everybody to think that it was so funny. But all of us pretty aggressively told this person off, like, this is not okay. Like, why would you think this is okay? This isn't funny. Like, put that away. Yeah, anyway. Generally, the fandom was/is pretty okay to nice, but had a zero-tolerance policy for Nazis, both online and in person. Of course, you can still find fan art or fan fiction about the Nazi regime and how it affected other countries in Europe. But anything that crossed the explicitly historical line was not well received. And even then, a lot of the historical fiction was shunned by people in and out of the fandom. Hetalia was supposed to be entertaining first and educational second, if not third. So many people didn't even see the need for Nazis to be there at all. The dub also made a very, very inappropriate and unfortunate joke that I will not repeat here. This joke still haunts Hetalia to this day. I'm not going to sit here and try to justify why they did it, because you can't justify it. It's unacceptable. It was in very poor taste and also very out of character and out of place in the Hetalia universe. And it only happened one time. So clearly it was not an established pattern, and I think that after they wrote this joke, they learned that it was a huge mistake and that they shouldn't do it. But again, I'm not going to sit here and try to justify or excuse what they did. Number 3, the Korea controversy and Japanese nationalism. Alright, before I get into this, I need to talk about the character of Korea, South Korea. The character of Korea originally appeared in the webcomic and the manga. When it was announced that Hetalia was going to be made into an anime, there was a petition to ban the anime by some South Korean civilians that amassed over 16,000 signatures to ban the anime or to stop its production. The hype/backlash was so severe that the South Korean National Assembly actually reviewed Hetalia and determined that it was a crime against South Koreans. This screenshot from the Hetalia archives actually shows them reviewing a fan redraw of a comic panel, which is surreal. It's very surreal. So why was the character of Korea considered so offensive? I don't have time to get into Japanese imperialism, its legacy, or the relationship between Japan and South Korea, but it's been rocky, to put it lightly, since World War II. The character of Korea was portrayed as being loud and obnoxious, wanting to grope Japan, and taking credit for things that other nations had created. This by itself seems like a lot of characters in Hetalia, but with the added context of this already tumultuous relationship between South Korea and Japan, it doesn't look great. Anyway, the Japanese station that was originally going to air Hetalia ended up moving it to being strictly online following the backlash. However, they claim that it had nothing to do with the controversy. So Korea doesn't appear in the anime anywhere except for in chibi form with the other nations around the world at the very end credit song. Over time, Korea has appeared less and less in the comics as well. So if you see someone online mention how Hetalia was banned in Korea, it actually wasn't. Korea never appears in the anime series, and even with the backlash, you can still watch it in South Korea. Of course, if you're an outsider looking in on all of this drama, it could be really easy to say, wow, I can't believe that Hetalia was so racist or, horrible, and therefore watching Hetalia is cringe. Mainly, the character of Korea is brought up again and again when the topic of Japanese nationalism is discussed surrounding Hetalia. There are certainly mangas that have offensive and harmful portrayals of Korean stereotypes. There were/are a lot of people who saw Hetalia as a product of Japanese nationalism, or that it embodied Japanese nationalistic ideology. I am a citizen of the United States. I have never lived in or been to Japan or Korea, so I'm not really sure if it's my place to have an opinion. So I will present both sides of this topic to the best of my understanding. There is a now fandom famous paper by a guy named Theodore Alexander Sands titled Belittling Japanese Nationalism in Axis Power's Hetalia. In 2013, universitypublications.net published this paper to its humanities and social sciences review. At the time, this paper was the only remotely scholarly research on Hetalia, but since then, there have been other papers and projects to come out refuting some of the claims that he makes in this paper. This appears to be an undergrad level paper, as there are no submitted in partial fulfillment of statements in the paper. So as someone who's written a lot of undergrad papers, I feel like I am knowledgeable about the subjects I wrote about, but not necessarily an expert. Hopefully that makes sense. So in the paper, Sands argues that Hetalia is not a product of Japanese nationalism because it makes fun of everyone, including Japan. He argues that it's not as egregious as other hyper-nationalist Japanese art, and is actually an artistic refutation of Japanese nationalism. I don't agree with every point that he makes, but he gets quoted and brought up a lot when fans are arguing online that Hetalia is not racist, so I think it's worth mentioning. Sands states that, at its most basic level, nationalism is a cause and effect of conceptualizing a collective group of people as a nation, a distinction between the self as seen as part of the nation and an other, which is seen as something separate and foreign. He goes on to say that nationalism can also inspire people to vigorously defend and reinterpret the nation's past in order to glorify the self in spite of criticism, foreign and domestic. He very bluntly states that racism has been one of Hetalia's biggest criticisms, but an analysis of the anime and the Japan-Korea comics shows that Himaruya neither glorifies the self, Japan, nor stigmatizes the other, Korea and the rest of the world. While I disagree with Sands on some of the things he says about Korea and the character of Korea, I'm not Korean. I've never been to South Korea, so I'm not really sure if it's my place to have an opinion here. I am not educated or informed enough to have an opinion on whether or not Korea is an offensive portrayal. I had 2 Korean friends in high school, both who had seen or read Hetalia to some degree. One of them thought that it was fine, that was really funny, and the other one found it really offensive. Korean people are not a monolith. Side note, again, Hetalia has so many characters that if you don't want to see one character or another, you can just not. It's really easy to just not look for it. Most of my time in the fandom was spent engaging with the European countries, so I really rarely ever saw Korea or Japan. As a result, I never became familiar enough with these characters to make a judgment on their portrayals. So looking back to the self here, nationalism. Sands states that, in Hetalia, every nation has its moments when its actions are designed to make people laugh at it, and Japan is no exception. Rather than idolizing Japan, Hetalia's representation of Japan is a socially awkward, emotionally repressed, and sometimes obsequious character to be laughed at. I do agree with this statement. One could argue that if Hetalia was intended to be Japanese nationalist propaganda, then the character of Japan would be portrayed as the bravest or the strongest or what have you. But he isn't. Really, nobody is. And while everybody is equally made fun of, shouldn't be used as an excuse to justify racism or otherwise problematic aspects of any piece of media, it certainly helps to disprove the idea that Hetalia is not a product of Japanese nationalism. One could argue that omission of the horrors committed by an imperial Japan is a defense of the actions or historical revisionism. But if that's the case, then one could claim that Hetalia is Nazi apologist, or Native American genocide apologist, or Rwandan genocide apologist, or transatlantic slave trade apologist, but it isn't. It isn't any of those things. It simply just doesn't address those things, as Hetalia is intended to be comedy rather than true historical account. And when Hetalia does discuss imperialism and colonialism, it's in very brief moments where everyone involved is shown to be foolish, greedy, and immature. However, there are some very excellent points to be made that the character of Japan is often the voice of reason, very serious and intelligent, especially compared to China in the anime. Additionally, his negative characteristics, being awkward, shy, etc., are not outright harmful to others the way that some characters' actions are, like Korea being obnoxious and gropey. There is no doubt that Japanese nationalism exists in the fandom, however. It doesn't take long to find the World War II era flag on fan art of the character, or fanfiction where Japan exhibits hyper-nationalist behavior in the World War II era, and that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. Truly, it seems like the people who create this type of fan work are young, naive, and from Western cultures, and don't understand the gravity of what the flag represents. And again, it's not an excuse, just an explanation. If you think that Hetalia is too strong of an example of Japanese nationalism to be redeemable, I understand. But as we will talk about later, the Fanon Hetalia has transformed so much about the source material that I would argue that a lot of the content the fans engage with is no longer tied to Japanese nationalism at all, especially when dealing with characters outside of Japan's sphere of influence. If this subject interests you, I would highly recommend you check out this paper by Majesty Kayla Zander titled Clean Japan, Nationalism in 21st Century Japanese Animation and Manga, which was actually published this year. I will say that, again, I don't agree with everything that she says. She does make some really great points, though. This paper was also written for a Japanese language and culture class, so I feel a bit more comfortable recommending this paper than I do Sans's, which I really can't find any more information about other than he may or may not have presented this at a Harvard event. I don't know. That's right, this video is so long that I'm doing it in multiple parts. I got nostalgic, so I dug out my old wig. Still looks pretty alright, I think. Number 4. Incest and pedophilia, sort of. So the thing about Hetalia characters is that they look and act human, and they sort of are and sort of aren't. Humans have mothers and fathers. Hetalia characters kind of do and kind of don't. Some characters have specifically named ancestors, like Rome literally being the grandfather of the Italy brothers. Some characters just have motherly or fatherly figures who raised them, like baby Canada was raised by France, or baby America being raised by England. The problem now is that these younger characters grow up to be the same age as the people who raised them, and then people ship them together. Spumano, which is a portmanteau of Romano and Spain, or southern Italy and Spain, is a very popular ship, but turns a little uncomfortable when you watch the episodes of Spain raising a young Romano. Additionally, in a comic strip, Spain asked a young Italy, Civitalia, to marry him when he grows up. The same can be said for baby America and England. In the comics and the anime, England and France duke it out to see who will become America's big brother, and you see England interacting with a young America in the series. And yet, US-UK, or the ship of America and England, is very, very popular in the fandom. In fact, it's the most popular if you're going by the AO3 ruling. So there are two arguments as to why this isn't incest or pedophilia. The first argument is that countries don't have familial relations the same way that humans do, so there are very few true blood relatives in the universe. Marriages and relationships also don't work the way that we expect them to. Marriages are almost entirely political, like between Austria and Hungary, or Poland and Lithuania. The second argument is that characters can be completely removed from the context of representing countries or any historical relations whatsoever, so just seeing how these characters interact as adults is enough to constitute a ship. Also, alternate universes are a very easy way to get around potentially problematic ships. If you want to ship France and Canada, but you don't like that France knew Canada when he was a baby, well, in this universe, they didn't meet until they were both adults. Because, again, these characters can always be divorced from context. All that said, there were definitely fans who thought that it was, cute that America and England would be in a relationship after England raised a young America, and that's not okay. That's kind of weird. Stop. Number 5, the big one. So with everything in Hetalia being some sort of metaphor or symbol for international relations and incidents, the concept of invasions can get kind of dicey. In the manga and the show, the concept of invasions are handled in a couple of different ways. These examples both involve Austria, not because he's my favorite, but because these are very popular episodes in the show. The first way is that a character moves into another character's house, sometimes by force. In 1938, Austria was annexed into Germany when the Nazis marched into Vienna. At the time, the non-Jewish population was more or less ambivalent about this. And as well as the show dances around the words Nazi and Third Reich and doesn't use them, it still talks about how Austria moved in with Germany and annoyed him with his antics. The second way is that the characters are literally shown going to war. During the War of Austrian Succession, Prussia invaded Silesia, which at the time was a region of the Austrian Empire that was rich in resources. In the War of Austrian Succession episodes, this is stated almost word for word, with Austria stating the famous line, "Prussia has seized my vital regions."
My manly tract of land has been occupied by that demon douche Prussia.
So this second example led to some pretty unfortunate fan interpretations. Some fans decided that being invaded by another country literally meant a character assaulting another character. This idea was unfortunately perpetuated through cosplay, through fan art that was not correctly tagged as not safe for work, etc. I would like to say that, again, this could be chalked up to young fans not understanding the gravity of the situation, but this certainly was not always the case. Unfortunately, with a fandom like this that once upon a time had fans of all ages, the line of you shouldn't say certain things to or around certain people definitely got crossed. If you're 18 or older and you know that you're talking amongst friends, you know what is and isn't okay to say. If you're interacting with strangers, however, particularly young strangers, you need to know when to keep your mouth shut. They had 18+ panels at conventions for a reason. Related to this, some early entries of the webcomic on Kitayume were much, much darker. Now, a lot of these strips have been lost, meaning they have been completely scrubbed from websites and removed from the canon. These strips include characters trying to undress other characters without their consent, characters groping each other non-consensually, and France and Spain literally being pedophiles. Now, of course, these were removed for obvious reasons, but the effect of these strips can still be felt. Both France and Spain have been associated with being rapey in and out of the fandom, and has caused people to associate Hetalia with being rapey. Now, personally, I never saw any of these strips until I was researching this video, but the general fandom vibe was that France and Spain, and even to an extent Prussia and England, were just seen as, irredeemably creepy. It doesn't help that in the anime, France is definitely played up to be creepier than I think he really is. Now, of course, this is not justification for Himaruya's actions. He definitely should never have drawn those strips, and definitely never published them. But it's good that he's taken them down, removed them from the canon, whatever. People can learn from their mistakes. Number 6, the shipping wars. Editing the script while you are filming. So when I asked on multiple platforms what a video essay about the history of Hetalia should include, multiple people, almost every comment, mentioned shipping wars. Now, it's important to note that the term ship wars here predates the use of the term between the pro-shippers and the anti-shippers on the Twitter sphere. Though the same arguments of who was or wasn't shippable carry through today, and we'll talk about that later. Now, shipping wars were certainly not unique to the Hetalia experience. I would argue that there are a lot of shows that have handled their ship wars a lot more poorly than Hetalia ever did. Voltron. However, online and on the con floor, they were certainly commonplace in fan spaces. Hetalia has so many characters, and therefore so many ships. And some pairings are more popular than others. According to AO3 tags, the most popular ships are America, England, England, France, Germany, Northern Italy, Southern Italy, Spain, America, Russia, Canada, Prussia, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, China, Russia, and Austria, Hungary. Pour one out for the Prussia-Austria we lost along the way. As you can see, England, America, Russia, France are all repeat names on this list. The highest levels of outright vitriol that I saw between shippers was definitely between the US, UK, and the FruK shippers. The Pruos, Oshun, and Pruhun shippers all just kind of like quietly hated each other while also secretly engaging in the other's content. Most of this hatred was just long comment threads or DeviantArt journal posts about how much they couldn't stand the other ship or their shippers. Sometimes it would just be like aggressive anonymous Tumblr asks. Sometimes it would be spamming the opposing ships' Tumblr tags with, potentially triggering images. And occasionally you would see cosplayers bickering, but it was really hard to tell what was genuine and what was just like in-character shenanigans. The problem was that it was just very loud, so to outsiders it looked worse than it probably was. And we definitely got some like awkward ship questions at panels like, Russia, why aren't you with China right now? Like, dude, sorry, we just don't have like a China cosplayer. Like, keep your ship questions to yourself. It's not hard. Sometimes you did get homophobes like griping about yaoi or whatever, but that was hardly a uniquely Hetalia experience. It seems like everybody remembers the Hetalia ship wars as this huge like daily thing that impacted the fandom constantly, but I truly can't find anything beyond like the usual fandom drama. So if you know of anything like major beyond like, an occasional tag raid on Tumblr that happened, like, let me know. I want to know about it. Number 7, OCs. Okay, so OCs, or original characters, are present in just about every single fandom. The running joke is that you can type in your name, the hedgehog, into Google, and you will get somebody's Sonic OC self-insert. With an almost infinite number of countries and cultures that have existed over time, I mean, there's going to be characters that Himaruya is just never going to get around to making. I think a lot of people associate OCs with just being cringy self-inserts. And while certainly that could be the case, and often was, there were definitely Hetalia OCs that were very, very well researched and well-developed characters. Like a lot of OCs, if you put them like into the manga, into the universe, they would have fit right in. The number one OC creator that I can think of is Dolce Minerva, previously Floppy Lopez on DeviantArt. Her Latin America OCs were just fantastic. Like, you could have put them right into the webcomic besides everybody else. And apparently she's even like updated the art and the character descriptions as she's grown as an artist, which I think is really neat. I myself had Hetalia OCs that I put a ton of work and research into, namely my Cherokee Nation OC that I created because I was really sick of seeing people just like generalize Native America into one character. Which brings me to my first problem with a lot of Hetalia OCs. People make characters for countries and cultures that they know absolutely nothing about. So some people, mostly young fans, pick a country, slap a design on it, and call it a Hetalia OC. There are any number of reasons that you could do this. Maybe you ship yourself with a Hetalia character. So you draw yourself, choose a country that doesn't have an official design yet, and put them together, and bam. That's your OC, and now you can ship yourself with your favorite Hetalia character to your heart's content. And generally there isn't any harm in doing this, just beyond, cringe or whatever. But sometimes it did make uncomfortable situations. There was this person that I interacted with a lot on DeviantArt back in the day, and she made an Ireland OC that was clearly like a self-insert, and the only thing remotely Irish about this character was that she had red hair. She drew so much art of shipping this character she made, her self-insert Ireland OC, with England, and I remember her getting a lot of negative comments on it. And of course, like, she was 13 years old, lived in the United States, and had absolutely no idea about the very complicated history between England and Ireland. Now, is this 13-year-old poorly thought out Hetalia OC a detriment to Irish culture? No. Is it actively harmful to how Irish people are treated in England? No. But if you're an Irish person in England who has experienced bullying and discrimination and harassment, I can see how art of these two characters shipped together like this makes you really uncomfortable. And it can come across as careless. Something that really bothered me personally was people making Native America OCs and drawing or stealing racist caricatures and calling it a character. There are thousands and thousands of unique ethnic groups and languages across the Americas, and to sum them all up into one homogeneous character representing Native America is lazy and disingenuous. You could argue that that's the point of Hetalia, but to make a Native America character would be equivalent to making one big Europe character, and Himaruya never did that. Additionally, the self-insert characters, or carelessly slapped together OCs, were a microcosm of Hetalia's Eurocentrism and naivety amongst its younger fans. You'd see a lot of white OCs for African nations, or a lot of really racist stereotypes attached to characters that went way far beyond the playful poking that Hetalia is supposed to engage in. Truthfully, the worst part about Hetalia OCs is that they were just kind of cringy. I mean, you'd see vampire OCs for no reason other than the artist thinking that vampires were cool, etc. Young artists, including myself back in the day, also drew their OCs using bases. Bases being outlines, silhouettes, or straight up entire drawings, mostly in the style of like early 2000s anime that had no clothes or hair and were meant to be drawn on top of. So if you had no grasp of human anatomy as a new artist, you could still have a full body drawing of your character. Most of these drawings did not look very good when finished, but again, these are mostly done by children, so who cares? There were entire Tumblr blogs dedicated to finding and mocking cringy Hetalia OCs, and while I agree that to some extent there does need to be dissection to understand why things like this are bad, a lot of it just turned into bullying children on the internet. There's truly nothing worse than finding your poorly drawn OC on one of these blogs for no reason other than it looks bad because you're 12 and you don't know how to draw yet. So what were some of the big things in the Hetalia fandom? How's the wig holding up, boys? Spirit gum, please stick to my head, spirit gum. If you're a longtime fan of Hetalia like myself, then some of these things that I'm about to say are gonna sound pretty familiar. If you're new to the Hetalia fandom, here's what you missed. I'm gonna try to be concise as this video is already freakishly long. Like I mentioned earlier, the fandom became an entity all on its own outside of Himaruya's creation. Fanon was this weird blend of influence from the comics and the anime, though I think it really leaned on the anime, unless specifically dealing with a character who had not yet appeared there. Headcanons and in-jokes became so widespread and popular that often they were indistinguishable from what was canon. Most of these things were inconsequential, like Prussia being a Rammstein fan, or Finland and Sweden being Sealand's gay dads, or Spain having a huge butt, or female Russia's name being Anya, even though Himaruya specifically said it wasn't, or Poland's favorite color being pink. That kind of thing. Some of this is loosely based on canon, but a lot of it was just kind of collectively decided upon. Very often, the Hetalia fandom would reject canon for historical or other reasons, and literally be like, nah, and just change whatever they wanted, often to the point of being unrecognizable. In most fandoms, canon is accepted, if not praised, for being this unshakable thing. But in Hetalia, so much was changed from the source material that often you'd be reading a fic and you're wondering why it hasn't been tagged alternate universe until you remember that there are no rules. Again, these characters can be removed from the context of being personified nations and still have potential for stories and character development. So when we remove them from the context of the manga and the anime, as a significant chunk of the fandom does, the problems of Japanese imperialism or problematic portrayals or historical revisionism become irrelevant. Nobody cares if Hetalia was written by a Japanese imperialism apologist when you're 31 chapters deep into a human AU soulmate fic about Austria inviting Prussia to see his boy band perform in Berlin. That's another thing about Hetalia. The storylines jump around between centuries, but a lot of the comics are set in the modern day. The greatest number of fics, at least from what I can find, are set in the modern day. Historical fics are certainly a popular subgenre, but they take a lot of time and a significant amount of research. The fan fictions honestly tend to be a little bit more straightforward than the comics, and so the good ones usually end up influencing fandom culture. April Fool's strips. One time I was dressed as Austria at a convention, somebody came up and got a picture of me and told me they liked my Austin Powers costume. Every year from 2007 to 2011, Himaruya made a comic strip specifically for April Fool's Day. The canon status of these strips have been hotly contested and debated over and over again, as sometimes really unsavory things happened, especially in the earlier strips. I think most fans have forgotten about everything that happened in April Fool's strips prior to 2011, as the 2011 strip was adapted into the anime. Human names. Fans began asking if the countries had human names back in 2007, to which Himaruya responded, sure. They serve no real purpose in the Hetalia universe, but there are lots of theories about their uses. One theory is that these are their legal names for when they need to blend in as human civilians. Another one is that they are real names of people who used to be humans who became countries, and when a country starts to die, they will become human again. Human names have never once been used in canon. The other thing about countries' human names is that often their origins are arbitrary and inaccurate. We will also probably never get a lot of answers to questions we have about them. Another problem is the romanization of katakana characters, which sometimes have multiple correct translations. America's human name is Alfred F. Jones. What does the F stand for? Who knows? Estonia's human name is Edward von Bach, even though von Bach is a German last name. Greece's human name is Heracles Carpusi, even though Carpusi isn't a Greek last name, it's the Greek word for watermelon. Germany's name is Ludwig, but he doesn't have a last name. There are entire subforums on old websites dedicated to arguing about whether or not Hungary's human name is Elisabeta, Elizabeth, or Erzsébet, or some other variation of that. Italy's last name is Vargas, which is a Spanish last name. Latvia's human name is Raivis Galante, which is a made-up first name and an Italian last name. You can see why we have so many questions. Fans have made their own interpretation of these names, often fudging them a little bit to be more accurate to a country's language, pronunciation, spelling, etc. Characters that were never given human names were assigned them by the fandom, and the popularity of the names varies from site to site. For example, Iceland's human name in fandom is Emil Stielsen, and Liechtenstein's human name is Lily. Truthfully, you really only ever see human names in human AU fanfics. HetaOni. I've never been someone who enjoys the horror genre, so this is something I was always vaguely aware of, but didn't really engage with. HetaOni is a fan-made horror RPG created by Tomoyoshi. It was based on an existing RPG called HetaOni. Hopefully I'm saying that right. It's a psychological horror game that was never finished, but it has its own fan wiki. As the game was originally in Japanese, English-speaking fans had to watch playthroughs of it translated on YouTube until DeviantArt user Piano Dream created a playable English version. Its plot is vast and confusing. It includes time travel, aliens, magical powers, and a lot of death. There's so much fan art of it that back in the day, you had to sift through things just to not see horror content. It's also spawned a lot of other fan games that want to see the story continued, as the story was never finished and has been abandoned since 2011. Yay! The Seychelles Renaissance. Seychelles first appeared as the player character in a dating sim game called Gaku and Hetalia. It's an unfinished game that takes place at the World Academy School. Side note, this officially made game is a great example of the removal of context from Hetalia. Gaku and Hetalia exists outside of space and time and all established canon, if you can even call it that. Some people didn't like that Gaku and Hetalia existed, so they just pretended it didn't, because it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. Seychelles is also one of the few female characters in Hetalia. This was also 2007 to 2010, the height of the I'm not like other girls movement on the internet. Girls online were pitted against each other and made to hate each other and treat each other as competition for boys' attention. Hatred of female characters, not just in Hetalia, but in everywhere, was commonplace, and Seychelles kind of just serves as a lazy self-insert into the world of Hetalia so that you can date your favorite characters. There was also a lot of complaining that Seychelles' existence would get in the way of everyone's favorite gay ships. Racism was also probably a factor, as Seychelles was one of the very few canon African nations, and she was definitely very much whitewashed up until season 5. As fans grew up and fan culture generally shifted towards more feminist attitudes, and as Seychelles was included more and more in the manga and was allowed to be more of her own character outside of a self-insert in a dating sim game, fans really began to like her. Sometimes newer fans will find old discourse about Seychelles and be like, why does everybody hate her? When generally that's kind of a retired opinion. Paint it white. In 2010, and dubbed into English in 2011, there was a Hetalia movie called Paint It White. The plot is asinine. It's ridiculous. It's really dumb. I love it. Aliens come to Earth and make everybody look exactly the same. The main 7 characters infiltrate the mothership to try to take them down. Italy draws faces on everyone and teaches the aliens the importance of individuality. Is it canon? Who knows? The 2019 tag raids. Much of the research here was already done for me, so I will be heavily referencing a post on r/hobbydrama from user Jaden Gypsum. The short version of the story is that person A on the internet mentioned something about something else that involved racism, and person B was like, that's rich, you're talking about racism and you're a Hetalia fan. Person B then got a bunch of people to spam Hetalia Discord servers and the Tumblr tag. This included posting gore and unrelated things in the tag, spamming people's ask inboxes with hateful messages and suicide bait, and sending racist messages. All this nonsense actually got #Hetalia to the trending page of Tumblr in 2019, which feels like a decades-old statement. There has always been this debate surrounding Hetalia, hopefully by this point in the video you get that, between the fans and the people who think Hetalia is irredeemably problematic. The main points from the anti-Hetalia folks are that the fandom stands World War II era Germany too hard, that World War II era Germany is portrayed as a good guy, and that the fandom just glosses over the parts that make it uncomfortable. The fandom's main points are that if you read the comics or watch the anime, that's not really the case at all. There are no good guys or bad guys in Hetalia. Everyone at one point or another is shown to just be silly. Additionally, it's made very clear in Hetalia that these characters represent stereotypes of the people or the culture and not the government. In fact, the governments of these countries are usually their biggest antagonists and greatest oppositions. The Holocaust is never ever brought up, save for one careless joke in the non-canon dub, so any claims of anti-Semitism are irrelevant, as Jewish people are never mentioned or brought up to any extent. And again, glossing over the parts that you don't like is kind of the point of Hetalia, because none of it matters and all of it can be engaged with outside of context. If you don't like the character of Germany, or if you don't like the World War II era strips, you can just skip them, because nothing of consequence ever happens in Hetalia. And this was like years old drama that at this point the fandom's really tired of hearing about. Again, this all happened on Tumblr, a dying website. The Venn diagram of Hetalia fans and people who still use Tumblr in 2019 is just a bunch of 20-plus-year-old Hetalia fandom veterans who are exhausted and just want to enjoy a dumb show. They aren't ignorant to the problematic aspects of Hetalia or its fandom, they just don't engage with it. Additionally, most of the anti-Hetalia points that I saw were either A, outright bullying of the mind-your-own-business type, or B, a huge stretch. While the tag raids are definitely a thing of the past, and much of it has been lost due to Tumblr's absolutely unnavigable archives. The link to the r/hobby drama post is in the description if you are curious and like to do some further reading, or if you are in the fandom and missed all of that action when it happened. George deValier. In December of 2010, a fanfiction titled Auf Wiedersehen, Sweetheart was published onto fanfiction.net under the pen name George deValier. The epilogue and final addition to the story were published on August 11th, 2012. The short version is that it's a romance between an Italian resistance member and a German fighter pilot in the World War II era. It became one of the most famous fanfictions in the Hetalia fandom and amassed over 4,000 reviews. And God knows how many hits. George's fanfictions were mostly set in what came to be known as the Vera-verse, a World War II setting named after the English singer Vera Lynn. Auf Wiedersehen, Sweetheart and We'll Meet Again are the titles of two of the major fics in this series, and also the titles of Vera Lynn's songs. Unfortunately, his fics are only accessible through the Wayback Machine, as George deleted his entire fanfiction.net account sometime in 2019, around the time that the tag raids were going on, but there's no reason to think that these two events are related. Before he deleted it, his profile even said, "To those still waiting, I would still like to finish these stories one day. Unfortunately, if I am going to be completely honest with myself and with you, that day may never come. Life can change a lot in a year, let alone 5, and we should never make promises we can't be certain we'll keep. I am sorry, and thank you so, so much. George." Kolko / Hetafacts.
Okay, just so y'all know, I'm recording some of this in post because I want to make sure that I get all my facts straight, and I'm also now recovering from a cold, so sorry I sound like this. Onward. Okay, so YouTuber Hetafacts began uploading in 2016. Her videos covered mysteries about the Hetalia universe, cosplay videos, fun facts about Hetalia, con vlogs, etc. Sometime in the last year, she changed her YouTube username to Kolko.
Some of her videos I did find very interesting, though sometimes she makes claims that are kind of hard to verify. For example, she says Himaruya didn't intend for Hetalia to be a long-term thing. Now, if you do have proof of this, please let me know in the comments below. Generally, she has a very defensive tone and has a defensive stance on the series as a whole. I'm going to be honest here and say that I'm subscribed to her to keep up with the fandom discussion, to know where things are at and where they're going, but generally I don't really like her videos. I'm not trying to tone police here because God knows that's the worst. I just find her very aggressive at times, and I think she dismisses a few really valid concerns and valid points in a way that I find to be mocking them.
She's been controversial in the past, namely for not putting content warnings on her visual novels and for general issues dealing with sensitivity. In this video from 2020, she says that she is on the mild end of the autism spectrum and that she doesn't have a sensitivity filter, but she isn't going to push this onto mental illness and use that as an excuse. She also says that she recently graduated from university where she studied politics and history. She says that she has become desensitized to horrible things in history through her overexposure, so she tends to talk pretty casually about these things. Now, I don't know if that's a valid justification for not being sensitive about certain topics, especially when it seems like she knows that she needs to be more sensitive up front. I mean, I don't know. That's just my opinion. Y'all can come to your own conclusions on that.
She posted a video covering the Korea controversy titled, "Was the banning of Hetalia's Korea justified?" I agree with some of her points and disagree with others. I dislike that she portrays opposing arguments in a purposefully annoying voice and with deliberately faulty logic.
I'm going to touch on as many points as I possibly can. But you're white and European, you wouldn't get it, you racist.
I also dislike that she is frustrated with Koreans for seeing Japanese reparations as being not good enough.
Why hasn't Japan apologized? They did. Oh, why didn't they give reparations to the comfort women? They did. Wait, so then why is Korea mad? I don't know, man. Probably because there's still a shrine to the World War II soldiers up that includes the names of war criminals.
Truthfully, no reparations made to any marginalized or oppressed group of people is ever going to heal the damage or fix the rifts. I say this as an Indigenous person who knows that no formal apology or any amount of money will ever heal the wounds of genocide. I just think she's a little victim blamey here. Instagram user China Mochis posted a 9-image collage titled Why You Should Be Wary of Hetafacts. It addressed some not so cool things. In her Discord server, she was talking about how her parents had some very racist attitudes toward her Korean boyfriend. And she stated, "I think I'm just going to date Asians for the rest of my life if I don't marry my current Asian." Regardless of whether or not she meant that she was just going to date Asians for the rest of her life to spite her racist mother, it's still not a great thing to say. The second point in China Mochi's post is that Kolko is skeptic of the BLM movements. Now, I think that this was taken a little bit out of context, and here's why. She says in the screenshot that she supports Black Lives Matter, but I do think that she could have been a little more careful with the phrasing law and order, which over the last 2 years has come to mean police brutality and is often seen as a racist dog whistle. The third point involves one of her Discord mods making a joke about Asian people eating dogs, which I don't care if it's a joke, it's not. Don't say that. Kolko posted an apology video on YouTube in May of 2021, which has since been unlisted. Again, when she's talking about the people who disagree with her, she uses a purposefully mocking voice.
Fuck you, I'm giving you a funny voice because I want to. This video is going to be boring otherwise.
She does say that she could have worded things better, but that she does support Black Lives Matter, but not violence or anarchy.
I am not anti-BLM. I am anti-anarchist.
She also says that she chastised the mod who made that racist joke. She also says that the person who originally made the Instagram post is just salty because they were banned from her Discord server for deliberately trying to trigger someone. Altogether, her apology video sounds genuine, albeit a little immature. She posted a written follow-up apology on her channel as well. Anyway, as a whole, I don't think she has a complete grasp on colonialism or its long-lasting effects, but I do think she recognizes the America-centricness of the Hetalia fandom, and if I don't stop now, this is going to turn into a whole other video by itself. I've seen a couple folks on Reddit mention that she tends to blow things way out of proportion, and this whole situation might be evidence to that, as she does have 22,000 subscribers on YouTube, and at the time that her apology video was made, the Instagram post in question only had 300 likes. People in her comment section are generally fairly uncritical and sympathetic towards her as well. Other people have discussed things about her videos that make them uncomfortable as well, so if you're really itching for drama that doesn't affect you, I'll let you look that up on your own. This wasn't intended to be like a Kolko roast. I mean, she has way more subscribers than I ever will, but you know, you gotta talk about it somewhere. Here are some honorable mentions that I literally don't have time to go on about, as this video is already way too long. Musicals, plural, the creepypasta about episode 23.5. Character songs. Everyone's hair has symbolic meaning. Shimeji, German Sparkle Party. I Am Matthewian. The Everyone's a Little Bit Racist skits that are still hysterical. Danish Slaughterhouse. Britain's original English voice actor being arrested for possession of child pornography. The Holy Roman Empire is actually a young Germany with no memory of his early days. Prussia is dying. Cardverse. Hetaloid. Gutters. The Great Hetalia Hiatus. Hashtag Bring Back Hetalia 2019 on TikTok. Russia and China fan art appearing on Chinese news. And drama CDs that everyone seems to know about but nobody seems to have. Hey, sorry everybody, you're about to have a drop in the audio quality because this video is so long that I actually lost some audio and video in the recording process. So I'm telling you now, sorry. Hetalia, for its many faults, was massive. A show cannot exist on this scale without changing the fandom landscape in some way. Let's start with Ask a Character panels. An Ask a Character panel is a fan-run event at a convention in which cosplayers take questions from the audience and answer them in character. Questions can be really trivial, like asking a character what their favorite color is, or they can be really serious, like asking a character how they felt about killing off another character. I could write a whole other video script on why I think Ask a Character panels are so interesting, but if you've never seen one or participated in one, just know that it's a great improv exercise and no two panels are ever going to be the same. It's very hard to verify what I'm about to say, as conventions usually don't keep the schedules from previous years either documented or accessible, but in talking to people who are longtime convention goers, I'm talking like 20 years or more experience going to fan conventions, the concept of Ask a Character panels did exist pre-Hetalia, but absolutely exploded post-Hetalia. Hetalia, like I said, has many, many characters, none of whom have any sort of subtlety about their personalities. It was a great way for people to get into improv, because as long as you have a basic understanding of a character, which isn't hard, just think of some like stereotypes about that country and watch 3 episodes, you can very easily answer questions in character. Shout out to my many friends over the years who cosplayed characters only because they were my friend and I was in a tight spot for main characters. I love all you guys. Thank you. The Hetalia version of an Ask a Character panel is often called Ask a Nation, and it was honestly some of the most fun I have ever had in my entire life. Sometimes I still have like stress dreams that I missed one. But these Ask a Character panels have outlived Hetalia, and now any popular show or anime will usually have one, even at small conventions. I would also note that Homestuck probably helped contribute to the rise of Ask a Character panels at conventions. It was popular around the same time that Hetalia was, but I would argue that Hetalia did more so because it's a much simpler premise. This one is a bit hard to explain, and you may not have seen it, but I think it's worth talking about. According to fanlore, 2P denotes a version of a character that has an alternate personality and appearance. Often, these characters are given characteristics opposite to their canonical version, such as creepy characters becoming genuinely friendly, or shy characters becoming assertive and dominant. Beyond video game sprites being recolored for 2 or more characters, the concept of 2P characters originated in the Hetalia Fandom. Himaruya published these recolors of characters with the idea that they could maybe be antagonists or from another universe. And like a lot of other things Hetalia related, a lot of the personalities of these 2P characters were completely decided upon by the fandom rather than being based on any canon source. While certainly more popular in the Hetalia fandom, the concept of 2P has made its way into other fandoms, even in small amounts. Ah yes, back here again, familiar territory. So if you saw Sarah Zed's video about the pro-shipper versus anti-shipper Twitter debate, which if you haven't, I would very, very much recommend it, link somewhere, you'll be familiar with the very black and white viewpoints that they have. A lot of the concepts of who is and isn't shippable can be traced back to a lot of fandoms, but I would argue that Hetalia is one of the larger ones due to its popularity, the time it was popular, and the nature of the characters. Like I said before, we see many of these characters interacting with others as children and then later as adults. For example, Southern Italy and Spain. Is it morally just to ship them together when Spain knew Romano as a child? When Spain had Romano working at his house as a child? Does it make me uncomfortable? Yes. Do I think it supports pedophilia? No. As long as you have an understanding of what grooming is and can spot it in real life and appropriately tag your things, then do whatever you want. Is it morally just to ship America and Canada when Canada literally refers to America as his brother? Is it morally just to ship England with anyone, given the number of countries that the English Empire invaded? Is it morally just to ship anybody with anybody else in this series? These are, by now, ancient debates that were had over and over again in the fandom, usually in long, drawn-out comment threads, but these topics do carry through to the current ship war atmosphere. A lot of the things that Sarah Zed talked about in her video seemed very, very familiar to me, and I am not at all involved in the Twitter shipping discourse. Follow me on Twitter if you want. I never tweet. Where is Hetalia now? Well, if the Kolko drama isn't indicative enough, Hetalia is still around. It's not nearly as popular as it once was, although there is a new season out that I still have not seen. This new season isn't really attracting new people to the fandom, though. It seems to just be re-roping in old fans. I think a lot of fans have aged out of the fandom, and there are a few new fans, but they still skew fairly young. There are kids who are fans of Hetalia that were born after Hetalia was created. Generally, the more toxic fans, as they always do, either grow up or move on to the next big fandom. I think the worst of the Hetalia fans right now are just people who are young and immature. And this group of people on the Hetalia subreddit bullying a black artist for drawing black versions of the characters. Grow up, it's Hetalia, it's not that deep, reverse racism isn't real. I can't believe we're still doing this in the year of our Lord 2021. I think Hetalia has had its time. I truly don't think it'll ever be as popular as it once was, especially if the Backstreet Boys reunion tour keeps going and cons keep getting canceled. I miss Hetalia. I really do. I don't miss the cringiness and the kids with no understanding of serious historical topics, but the con landscape and the fandom landscape have transformed for the better over the years, and I wish that Hetalia had really gotten to experience the height of the cosplay is not consent movement. I miss being Austria at panels. I miss goofing off with my friends. I miss improv. I'm so happy to have documented the time that I did, and now when I watch this video from 2015 and I get real up close to the camera to make sure it's still recording, it really is a nostalgic moment to look at me in my terrible wig and my dollar store drag makeup and know that it's still me. And honestly, rewatching some of the old videos brings me a lot of joy. Some of them. Also, I just played my high school senior recital right before this panel, and I absolutely shredded Vivaldi in the background, and I don't have the chops to do that anymore.
DT Dubs, he's badass. It doesn't sound like tuna.
Actually play.
Yeah.
Hetalia is the perfect example of a fandom that took a lot of creative liberties with the content that they were given and created horrendous and beautiful things out of it. If nothing else, it was a dumb little show that got us all interested in world history. I mean, I myself learned how to identify hundreds of flags, and I can now name every single country on a world map. And for all its faults, I don't think that it was completely irredeemable. Normally, Hetalia videos have comments just full of cringe and reminding us of all the terrible things, but if you were in the Hetalia fandom and you have a happy or positive or fun memory, leave it in the comments. I want to read it, I really do. Wow, this video was really long, and I didn't get to talk about all the things I wanted to talk about, but some things had to go on the chopping block. Is there anything important that I forgot to mention? No, don't think so. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. This video meant a lot to me, so if you made it all the way through, you're the best. Thank you. A special thanks to my patrons, Josh Ferguson, Dalton, I Am the Teacup McAdoo, Alexis Womack, Brian Barnes, and Paige. You guys are the best. If you like this video, consider subscribing. My Patreon link is in the description. And thanks again. I'll see you in the next one.